What this similarity with other lifestyle blogs suggests, to me at least, is that Mormons are at a moment of low tension with surrounding society. We actually have to manufacture the tension with rhetoric about the family being under siege, which requires ignoring statistics like declining divorce, teen pregnancy, and abortion rates, increasing numbers of women leaving the workforce to care for children, progressive employer support for family-friendly policies, including maternity and paternity leave. This lack of optimal tension with the surrounding society allows differences between Mormons to arise, as in the 60s when Moss notes the variation in Mormon political convictions. Without clearly defined external threats, circling the wagons will inevitably draw circles that include some self-identified group members who sympathize with different kinds of out-group members. So we get these internal tensions by trying to create external tensions. However, lacking the theological and communitarian elements of resistance to American modernity, the public and male elements of early Mormon resistance, this increasingly public domesticity may lack the necessary ideological underpinning to really create boundaries for Mormons. The confusion over the theological justification for valorizing stay-at-home motherhood is evident in the divided sphere of Mormon women's personal writings, on blogs particularly. And here are just a few examples. I'm not a feminist because I don't support, look fondly on, hope for, or work towards equality. Equality, that's my hang-up. Equality has never done any good for me. When I try to look at the world with my equalizer glasses, it leaves me empty and upset. Equality presents a scale and binds you, and life is not fair, so how can it be equal? But even if it could, I don't want to be equal to the males in my life. I just want to be me. If that means I'm more, then I'm more. If that means I'm less, I'm less. But most of the time I think I am more, and I think most women are too. Or, here's another quote from another blog. Basically, I don't choose to use the term feminism for myself because the term daughter of God suffices, more than suffices, to produce something inside of me that is ultimately commanding. And to that end, I also believe that any woman who was, has been, and will be inspired to bring about the betterment of the female life was also directed by God. I acknowledge the efforts made by these women, tough decisions and radical thinking for the good they have done. I believe they were inspired by personal and powerful revelation, not feminism per se, apparently regardless of what they said. Ultimately, I believe being a Mormon female, along with all the covenants, promises, and oaths I have made, supersedes the feminism agenda. And sometimes I worry that if my fellow saints get too engaged in what is and what isn't a Mormon feminist, they miss the whole glory of being a Mormon woman. In speaking of the confusion on the other side of Mormon women who do self-identify as feminists, religious studies scholar Melissa Proctor wrote, she's talking about this group called WAVE, which is Women Advocating for Voice and Equality. Is that right? Yeah. WAVE explicitly identifies itself as feminist by virtue of a stated commitment to gender equality, but also asserts that being feminist and faithful are not mutually exclusive. Their website indicates that WAVE hopes to make changes to policy and practice that do not require doctrinal variation, and that its primary purpose is to uplift and support women. It's unfortunate that these discussions always so unfortunately evoke lingerie ads. Such a gentle, almost pastoral Mormon feminism seems unlikely to evoke outrage or result in ecclesiastical discipline. No doubt this gradual incrementalist approach to increased gender equality in the church has strategic advantages compared with outright defiance of church leadership. But as it is described, one wonders what concrete goals the organization hopes to achieve. This confused and confusing rhetoric will persist and even remain necessary as long as tension with the surrounding culture is generated by privileging certain forms of family life without clearly articulating a doctrinal rationale, and while nominally allowing different choices between equally worthy women. One example is Elder Cook's recent conference talk, in which he seemed to suggest that they really mean it when they say that different choices are acceptable for faithful women. He did still, however, use economic necessity as the only stated justification for a mother choosing to be employed outside the home. Two things could change this confusion. The less likely possibility, I think, would be for Mormonism to decrease emphasis on a particular family form as absolutely central to Mormon identity. This might make it possible for a broader range of young Mormon women to incorporate Mormonism as an element of their personal identity, but probably at the expense of some Mormon distinctiveness. Alternatively, we might try to articulate a more robust theology of patriarchy. it seems quite possible that many young Mormon women's loyalty would extend to embrace male headship without the elastic help each other as equal partners clause. But these are the conversations that we need to have. We need to talk seriously about the language of men presiding in the home, and either get serious about it and embrace it. We need to talk about why helping each other as equal partners is the ideal for home life, but is never modeled in church governance. We need to figure out whether encouraging women to stay home with their children has to do merely with what we regard as women's nature, or whether we mean it as a mode of resistance to assimilation. We need to make some attempt to explain why, if women staying at home with children is God's eternal ideal, it has been limited to a few relatively brief historical moments, and why it is a choice available only to the rich. The superficiality of our discourse around these topics suggests that we are terrified of them. Even women willing to be far more open than has been typical about their experience, as their personal experience as Mormon women, are extremely hesitant to generalize. Indeed, an LDS women's publication called Segula, which has carefully branded itself as more orthodox than Exponent 2 and other publications, has published on topics like I thought I pronounced it wrong, which is entirely possible, has published on topics like plastic surgery. It published the only Mormon poem that contains the word boob job, as far as I know. Frustration with the stay-at-home motherhood role, chafing at Mormon cultural expectations for women, etc. But it has an explicit editorial policy of not allowing authors to move from describing their personal experience to articulating criticism of the institution. That is, it's okay to say, I was sad that I had to watch from the pew as my baby was blessed, but it is not okay to say, I think women should be able to participate in blessing their infants. Indeed, saying, of course I'm not agitating for women's ordination, or I wouldn't want the priesthood, is a necessary, even reflexive caveat to any statement suggesting that one might desire fuller participation for women in any aspect of church life. Discussions of women's roles in formal church settings, and even in private conversations and online forums, devolve into a ritualized performance of norms of femininity and righteousness, requiring a studied placement of interlocutors into a rubric of political and theological commitments, where women who favor the status quo regard differing opinions as moral lapses, and women who seek change regard difference as evidence of ignorance. If questions that underlie conflict between Mormon women, if doctrinal discussion remains off limits, and especially if we fail to engage the real questions that underlie conflict between Mormon women over these questions, preferring to see women's different choices as evidence of individual failure to adequately perform sentimentalized cultural notions of femininity that are neither scripturally warranted nor theologically justified, we will continue to lose the talents and gifts Mormon women might contribute if they were not busy arguing over a chronically moribund Mormon feminism that makes occasional Monty Python-esque protestations of renewed vitality and perambulatory intent. Worse and worst, we risk losing sight of what home must mean to 21st century saints. If instead of thinking long and carefully about home as a locus of resistance to the excesses of materialism the Book of Mormon warns against, thinking of homemaking as part of a larger project that belongs equally to saints of both genders in diverse marital and familial situations, if instead of doing that, we reduce homemaking to the performance of certain retro-inflected femininity that harkens back to the post-war moment when American advertisers constructed the housewife as consumer-in-chief, we will find ourselves using our cute, vintagey, hand-stamped linen handkerchief to wipe away the tears we will weep for Zion.